Can you guys hear me? All right. So first of all, it's an amazing August panel here, and I also see a lot of who is who here in this room as well. So let's keep this panel discussion interactive. You can come in and ask questions. I have a few for sure. We'll keep it more experience-based because, putting together, I think, decades of experience, hundreds of years of experience in DevOps is there. So it's up to you to take home some real-life examples, real-life challenges, and let's keep it interactive. As you can see the introduction, some of them have really done incredible stuff. I was talking to them earlier as well. Super solid stuff. So it will be interesting. With that, I want to start the panel with 4 areas that I wanted to cover, with mastering DevOps. One is, stage 1, which is more around how do you onboard, DevSecOps, because security is becoming a big challenge. Like we spoke, everywhere security is a concern, compliance is a concern, and we need to solve that. So how do you onboard DevSecOps? Right? That's the first stage 1. Stage 2, having onboarded, how do you optimize it? Right? What you can do to make sure you can optimize. And later we will operationalize that piece and finally evolve. Right? So that's how we will keep it. We'll keep it short, to the point, and we'll hopefully have some time for the audience to ask some question also. Right? So with that, I'll start with Sampath. Where are you? You are there. He's from Zepto. And the question I have for you is, what are the most common roadblocks you find while implementing DevSecOps within your company, right?
Yeah, hi, thanks Prasanna. Hi everyone. Yeah, I think so the most common thing when we start to implement DevSecOps is definitely this will slow down my pace of delivery. Of course, people wants to push. The business wants to see things are actually coming in, they're getting delivered. But somebody from DevOps or DevSecOps, we are keen on how do we sort of secure the systems, right? It's like maintaining the velocity, but still you should be able to solve that all the basic security issues, catch them early, give the early feedback to the developers. So with that, I would say people have to start integrating their security practices starting from their IDE, right? When the developer starts coding, so when he starts writing his code in his IDE, that's when you should be able to catch majority of the issues. It starts from there. So when you start from the culture, people should be able to adopt it, and you build the tooling around so that his velocity is not compromised or actually reduced. So that's the challenge, of course, as we embrace the security challenges. We put up tools and integrate them with your IDEs, and especially the main thing on CI/CD. So if you are able to integrate that, then you can give that feedback early so that nobody will feel that it's like it's going to stop me or reduce that velocity. The problem is when everything is done, pushed to production, then you are started talking about security, then definitely that will bring down the velocity, right? The best way is to give that feedback as early as possible in the SDLC lifecycle so that people can work on that feedback seamlessly and then give the feedback at every stage, develop, build, deploy, post-deployment, and then how do you kind of give that continuous visibility for a developer? That'll improve the the whole velocity, and it keeps your software secure, Prasanna.
Awesome. Thank you, Sampath. By the way, when I was discussing with them, we also wanted to find any commonality we have, apart from DevOps, because DevOps is obviously the common theme that is connecting us together. Him and I come from the same town, Mysore, so it's very interesting. He's a yoga enthusiast, so DevOps and yoga seems like a very common combination as well. So welcome, Sampath.
Thanks,
the forum,
Prasanna.
and thank you for your answer. Basically, catch them early is the theme. Try to find issues early so that you can get time and try to solve them. Now, having said that, Naresh, question to you. While this is great to implement that way, what are the, ecosystem play that you have? What are the tools, technology that can help in adopting, for a company which is just looking at DevSecOps today, how should they look at it?
Sure, thanks Prasanna. So I'm building on what my friend Sampath has said here, right? So essentially the whole idea is to, in our case, given the scale and the variety that we deal with the Infosys customer base, was to sort of platformize this. And the idea was to essentially be able to work with, say, we today integrate with 100 plus different tools in the ecosystem, which means any different work pattern that happens in Infosys, we should be able to seamlessly have the team leverage the platform to do their end-to-end DevSecOps journeys, and the experience has to be seamless for them. So first and foremost was to sort of think of the ecosystem in a much broader sense, look at all the different tool sets that need to be integrated together. Second was to look at essential elements of, and I look at the analogy of brakes. We can't drive very fast in Bangalore because of the traffic, but if you are to head out on a highway, the thing that gives you confidence that you can actually cross 100 kilometers per hour is the fact that when you hit the brakes, they're going to work, right? So a lot of these processes, a lot of the frameworks that we put in place are essentially functioning in similar ways. They should give you the confidence to go at a very high speed. They should give you the confidence to have the assurance that you are going to be compliant, you are going to be able to sort of meet your regulatory requirements. At the same time, go at speed with security and also be able to do this at scale. So tooling became very critical for us, and ensuring that first-class integrations with all of the standard tools that we can typically imagine. And this has happened over a number of years. The second thing was to put the process ahead of this, which means the different work patterns that happen in the company, the different frameworks that exist within the company should all be embedded through the DevSecOps ecosystem. And the third thing is the choice of the platforms for orchestration and automation. We also brought in flexibility to be able to pick and choose the typical platforms that you need to orchestrate. So which means it's not one single thing that you are forced to use, but depending on your client context, depending on your project context, you have the flexibility to pick and choose any of this. So in some ways, to make this happen, these have been the building blocks. And in that, from a security standpoint, the approach that we took was to one, have this happening at 2 or 3 different layers. So the first is to essentially look at the ability to have certain things which are absolutely mandatory, so no compromise, not negotiable. And this could be through certain tools that are integrated, pre-built into the ecosystem. Second, things which the team has from their specific context, the kind of app they're working on, the kind of tech stack they're working on. And the third is things that come from the customer standpoint, right? The client context. So this is sort of in a nutshell how we have looked at the ecosystem, Prasanna.
Awesome, thanks Naresh. So Naresh, by the way, handles the central productivity team at Infosys, with 300,000 plus, I don't know what the number is now, to make sure they are productive is his ownership. And in that, building a platform of this kind is awesome. Thanks, Naresh. By the way, the commonality between, this panel, Naresh and I were in the same team 25 years ago. And now he's sitting on the same panel. So it's an interesting journey both of us have had. With that, I want to move to the next part, which is more on operationalizing. So when you operationalize, the issues that happens is more around, how do you prioritize? Because once you automate, there are various things that comes to your mind, and now you need to prioritize them to make sure you invest on the right thing, right? So Chidu, back to you. Like, how do you, in your company, and how do you seek, others should prioritize issues and, DevOps initiatives that come, prioritize in the right way?
Hello. So, see, I think they have probably pretty much covered almost everything I wanted to say, but I'll add something extra. So, let's say when you start off, so for you to operationalize security and efficiency in production, right? You have to start off early in the cycle, and you also want to make sure that you maintain velocity. Now, how do you make sure you do that at scale? You have to actually empower the lowest denominator, essentially the developer as well as the DevOps engineer, to make the right decisions when they start off. So, as he said, make sure that in the CI/CD pipeline the right tools are integrated, so that by the time it goes to production, there is no surprise. And you make sure that's a common framework for the entire company to use, especially not the entire company, especially, for example, if you use a specific language or a platform, they all use a common framework, and the developers and the DevOps are onboarded on the need for ensuring that this process is adhered to. Now, there's one more thing. What I've noticed in the recent past is that, right, DevOps engineer typically doesn't understand applications very well, application development very well. And the application developer is not as knowledgeable on the framework, especially, we are talking about the Linux system on which it runs, or in the containerized framework. They're not able to visualize the problems that a DevOps engineer could visualize or understand. So it is important that each person has some extra cross-domain knowledge to ensure that they take the right decision on top of a framework adhered to in the company.
Thanks, Chidu. Just a added question. We spoke a lot about CI/CD. There is this whole concept of shift left of left, shift right. Do you want to comment on those areas? If you have implemented. Harish, you want to do?
Yeah, I'll touch a little bit on what is it as an engineering, right? So you move the problem earlier on, and from there you start to engineer the process. At ACO, we have very strong engineering view on what we do. And by the way, the DevOps team works more closely with us. They're even sitting together right now. I can see them, the engineering leader and the DevOps leader there. So that sort of talks about the culture. First is to shift left. You need to have the right kind of culture in the company, right? For example, security is not an afterthought. How do you bake up security right into your engineering process? How you do it. The majority conflict comes especially when you do prioritization, and probably that's what you're asking. Security vulnerabilities are always coming in. Somebody is trying to run it either automatically or somebody else is doing it outside. You sometimes want a neutral party to come and be able to do it, right? So that you're not biased. It becomes the onus of the engineering leader to be able to exactly slot in and then clear it out. Majority of the issues or majority of the practices revolve around getting the right priority at the right point in time. It's not about whether people don't know how to do it. So shift left essentially is how do you make this process as part of your regular planning process, regular building process, right? If you have a roadmap to run and you're running, like a horse, just looking at what you want to get to, and you don't take care of all this in between in your process, you could automate it to a small degree. But vulnerabilities, they have to make it to your existing execution roadmap right now. That's a extreme shift left process that sometimes you have to talk about, right? That works very well, especially for D2C companies like us, where the product is visible in front of the customer, right? It doesn't go through a lot of hops before somebody consumes it. It's exactly visible to the customer. I think this is something that has worked for us, and this is something for a very strong engineering-led organization. I think this probably becomes a lot more relevant.
Okay, thanks, Harish. By the way, just on the trivia, Chidu is a cyclist. One of the coolest cyclists I have heard or seen. He cycles from JP Nagar to ITPL daily to office, and goes faster than a car, right? So that's amazing. I've not heard anyone do that, so that's good, wonderful. And Harish, by the way, has run some startups, and from a commonality perspective, him and him were in the same startups a few years back, during COVID. So I think we are finding more and more commonality amongst all of us. Having said that, in terms of shift left, just like Chidu was saying, it's about, there is a wall in skills between developers and DevOps folks. But as you shift left, how do you enable developers to think like a DevOps engineer, give them the tools, give them the exposure so that they do less mistake, which DevOps guy has to fix, right? So that's that should be the thinking, and it's happening. As an industry, we are evolving in that space as well. Right, so just further moving in the same space, Praveen, back to you. How can, when you have this agenda, right, DevSecOps agenda, there is an amount of investment you have. Now you need to prepare and build towards that agenda, be it start from training, processes, tools, technology. Like, how do you see that going,
So I think with the way the world is changing in terms of security, and not just for DevOps, but across.
A little bit closer.
Yeah. So what we have, at least I have observed across my startups and corporate journey is, first of all, you have to get, of course, the buy-in of the leadership. It just can't happen that you as an engineering leader or DevOps leader wants to introduce one more tool or introduce one more process. It doesn't work that way. What I have seen is, even on the engineering side, you first have to get a buy-in from the leadership, and then of course, it has to become a culture of the company. It's like as simple as, like, we were outside this panel, we were talking about even the CAPTCHAs are no longer secure, right? Earlier somebody is, let's say, giving you an image. Nowadays it's no longer a secure way of handling it, right? So your product also have to think about the security. From there itself, then it has to become part of your engineering. Then when you are, let's say, deploying your Docker, your images that you are putting up, that has to be passing through certain tools, which are, like, nowadays, plenty of them available. You have to identify which fits well for your need. Getting that buy-in from your developers is a task of the leader itself, because developers will always prioritize the feature over security. At the same time, you have to inculcate that culture, let them know, if you make this mistake, this is where you are. So for example, in case of Medi Assist, let's say, we manage around, let's say, 20,000 CR of premium, approximately similar amount of cash passes through us. A small mistake of a developer can actually, let's say, even if it is 1 rupee, it is like we are talking about 8 million rupees. And so they have to understand that everything that they put on as a piece of code, and also the DevOps team has to understand anything that they miss on the security side can eventually lead to a fiasco if you are dealing with millions of or billions of lives. Given we are in India, we have, like, each one of us touches, if not more, at least, let's say, maybe 100 or 200 millions of lives every year. So it has to, what I have seen in my experience is the training of not just the users or the organization as a whole, but also to the developers, to the DevOps teams, and getting a buy-in from all of them in the philosophy that you want to implement is what plays a very crucial role in this entire piece.
Awesome. Thanks, Praveen. Praveen is a ardent traveler. He has been in multiple startups, like she said. To add to your answer, it has to be a boardroom topic. I agree. Security is not a technology issue; it's a business issue. It has to be top-down as well. While all us engineering leaders try to push it up, bottom-up as well. So I completely agree with you. So with that, as you operationalize further, Satish, question to you. Now, as we build all of this, towards operationalizing, one of the challenges Harish and I were talking as well is the dependency you have with open source. Right? I think that is increasing. We need to talk how you're managing it, but there is a proliferation of how many open source components you are dependent on, even to write a simple functionality. Right? So with that kind of thing, and with a boardroom expectation that you need to be secure all the time, it's a challenge in itself. So how do you propose, how do you handle it?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start with the basics, right? So first thing is, at the dev side of it, we should have some sort of architectural governance to make sure that you really vet all the open source or third-party technologies that you're including in your product or a solution. Start with that. You make sure that whatever open source or third-party technologies you're taking, they are coming from the right source. You're able to check their provenance, make sure they have the right certificates, hashes. Then you would obviously have a proper life cycle management to ensure that at regular intervals you are upgrading all this open source or even the third-party libraries that you're using. this is a very basic, and in your DevSecOps pipeline, you would definitely have a vulnerability scanning tool to ensure that you are tracking if vulnerabilities have opened up. You need to make sure that you have discipline in the team, that you are addressing all the security vulnerabilities as part of your development cycle, and you don't push it back because functional work takes priority sometimes, so we have to make sure of that. This is at the basic level. But when you're talking about delivering to, say, governments, federal governments, and especially our team does a lot of that, and what we have serious compliance requirements for from, say, US federal government to ensure that we meet the requirements of a framework like SSTF, which is the NIST SP 800 218, which covers the whole aspects of the supply chain security. And one thing that we can do is really include a software component analysis tool as part of your cycle, so that you're tracking your libraries, you're making sure that you have the latest versions, and you also generate an SBOM, which actually is a mandate these days for us to deliver as part of our deliverables. And if you are outsourcing part of your development to some other company, then you have to make sure that that company also follows these basic structures which are kind of defined in this NIST standard. So I would encourage people to look at that standard. It's pretty comprehensive. So thank you.
Awesome. Anita, I want to just come back on the same question. When you
Thank
look
you,
at...
Prasanna.
sorry, go ahead.
I think Satish has said it all, governance one, but what we look at is what are our potential threats. I work for Medi. It's been a decade I'm in the company, and we have close to 200 plus products or applications. So 200 plus products and applications using multiple open source technologies, and it is quite critical as well. And with this decade of experience in Amadeus, I have seen multiple transformation as well in the company. We first did the TPF decode transformation, where we moved away from our mainframe systems to open backend. And then there are certain product transformations which we all comply and do about it. And eventually today, as we speak, we are partnership with Microsoft Azure, and we are in the cloud transformation journey. During this transformation phase, if I myself have worked for like a decade, you need to understand the products, how old they are. Most of them are following the monolith architecture. So now with this monolith architecture, getting into the cloud transformation journey. So basically we are in a phase, as I speak, we are in a phase where we have some of the applications which are still on-prem, some which are on cloud, and some in the migration phase between on-prem and cloud. And Satish said it quite clearly about the governance. I would see, at least in the division which I had, we strongly believe in two aspects. The first one is get your application scorecard. So what it means, have your scanning done, an application scan, penetration tests, check your triage, check the false positives, vulnerability defects, as well as fix your defects. So fixing the defects, you prioritize your defects, and as well fix it not only in the test systems but also in the production. So now we have done our part of assessing what the defects are and what are the issues, and we have fixed it. But what next? The second aspect, which we strongly believe in, involving the customers. So make them part of your decisions. So when you're fixing anything or any patches, involve them part of this, and they are supposed to be upgraded to the latest version as soon as possible. So for me, having both these on the application scorecard as well as on involving the customers, taking your latest patches, I believe that we are at a good path of assessing as well as managing some of the security risks.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita, for that. Interestingly, Satish is is a painter. He loves painting, for stress busting, as a stress buster. And Anita uses dance as a stress buster. So very interesting usage of art there. I want to move to the next stage now, more on how do you optimize? You kind of onboarded, operationalized. Optimization is all about measuring. If you don't measure, you can't improve, right? So in that context, Pushparaj, to you, what are the KPIs, one should have, when you're implementing DevSecOps, and how do you see that measured and managed?
Thank you, Prasanna. That is a very interesting question, very relevant to this forum, what we have. When we look at the KPIs which you are measuring, which our friend has explained, we have the controls, we have the goal where you want to go in a vehicle, but without these KPIs or metrics, you will not get the feedback where to apply your brake. You may have a brake, but you will not be able to apply when to apply, right? So from us heading this engineering for Wipmo, the way how we see the KPIs for DevOps is not specific to an individual unit, right? DevSecOps is a kind of a horizontal across different phases of your product life cycle. So starting from development, operation, and from your business perspective, the metrics has been monitored. This is the way how we are doing, or we are trying to integrate together. First thing, from the development perspective, from CI/CD, it talks about your daily build rate you have, how many build failures from your CI/CD pipeline, and what kind of test case coverage you have, code scores you have, as well as your automated code compliances you have, right? Once you are done, you are moving on to your delivery and your deployment metrics. Here the famous DORA metrics comes into picture. When you say DORA, DevOps research and assessment metrics, right? Here the rate of change, the frequency in which you are introducing the change into the system, and how successful it is. Is it how many failures you have, the frequency of deployment, and meantime between recovery. When something happens, how quick you are able to recover from the system. That is what primarily, and we being in the regulated industry of payment, these things are very, very critical for us to monitor. Then comes your operation and reliability engineering. Here you will be looking at number of deployments you have done, and if you are providing a API service to the customer, how many successful rate you have, and how many failure rate you have been achieved, right? And what is the rollback rate of the transaction you have done, and what is the failure rate for the change. These are the very critical metrics we will be tracking from the reliability perspective. Then from security perspective, from the compliance side, we will be looking at how many vulnerabilities identified in a production, how quick we are able to fix the vulnerability in production, and compliance is very critical part of our things. How many findings coming from the compliances for you. And as I keep on saying, DevOps is not an independent function. We have very clear metrics from the feedback from the team collaboration perspective. What is the feedback from the developers? What is the cycle time to implement by implementing all the checks in the DevOps cycles, whatever you have, and meantime to between failures. I think these are the very key metrics. At the end, from the delivery or the business perspective, we'll be looking at if something goes wrong, what is the cost of the vulnerability in terms of reputation, because more than a monetary impact, the reputation impact is unrecoverable for us, right? So that is the one, and for cost per each deployment. I think these are the key metrics where any organization look at, but it's evolving. AI coming into picture, things are getting changed, but this is very basic metrics where any organization can look for.
Awesome, Pushpaj. Yeah, I wanted to add another slice of the question to the same thing.
Just one more point I would like to add, especially in this metrics that we are talking about. Obviously, the MTD is the very key metric for you to show that how your DevSecOps pipeline is really working. So we had a scenario where we have implemented DevSecOps pipeline, everything was working good, we were all happy, and metrics were showing all green, all good. And one fine day, it was a security product, top security product that we have used. And one fine day, the developers of that security company realized that they're not scanning for 2 CVs that was found 2 years back. And they have pushed the fix. And the next day, we could not deliver anything to production. All the pipelines started because we put a CV blockers based on the priority. If any critical cannot go to production, right? So it blocked all our pipelines.
So the point I'm trying to say is that the tool selection is the key. And if you don't have a right tools in your pipeline, obviously you will have a lot of false positives. You might be looking at wrong data, and you might be having a bad quality of metrics. Tool selection has to be really given proper thought and selection process.
Awesome. Being a tool vendor myself, I can't agree more. But I wanted to, extend the same question to you, Vasu. We spoke about a bunch of KPIs, Pushpraj rightly addressed. Do you also sign up, coming from security, SLAs with your customers, buyers, saying, hey, if there is a security issue, I'm going to fix it. If it is critical, fix it in 2 days. Is that something that is there in the industry? You guys are all, a bunch of them, by the way, are from fintech, airlines, so they are all regulated heavily. So is that something there, and how do you manage that?
Yes, very much, very much. So being a highly regulated, I represent a company called Cashfree Payments. We are a leading API banking company, and being a RBI regulated, we are RBI regulated company, and we cannot have, as part of our process, let any CV go to production without some tooling is looking at it, right? And when the CV is found, the first and foremost thing is, based on the criticality, we block from code being committed to your repository, or even in the scan of your dynamic testing phases, we block the build going to production. So there is a SLA, even if after you release the code to production, obviously there may be scenarios that could have got missed, and then something might have found later part of it. The moment there is a critical CV identified, and immediately the SLA kicks in, and there is automated process which triggers, and it gets notified, and security engineers get involved, validate, and then make sure that the SLA is followed. And that SLA has to be not only for us, for our customers, also for the compliance perspective, right? We have to adhere to the set of complaints that we commit to our customers, as well as the compliance auditors. So it is critical to make sure that we identify and categorize and prioritize, and then make sure we give attention to right critical issues, and then follow that SLA. So SLA is very critical, yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Vasu, the next question comes to you again. You were mentioning this as well. The regulatory bodies, they're also evolving. In the case of fintech, RBI, they're also learning, and they're improving their regulatory restrictions. So in that context, do you see policy as code, where you can keep that dynamic, live, and keep implementing policy the way you want? Is that possible?
Yes, very much, very much. So if we are a regulated company like us, especially RBI, also learning a lot of new policy makers also learning, and they are also coming up with new policies as well. So we get almost every alternate week some master directions from RBI saying that, hey, are you doing this, are you doing this, are you doing this? And that becomes evolving, and it is ever changing, continuous process, right? So I'll give a small example. A few years back, again, audit and compliance always has been afterthought, and now I'm seeing that it is changing with all the DevSecOps and all those things, but we have a long way to go, especially from the compliance part of it. So few years back, I was going to prepare for an audit, which was very critical for the business to succeed, and then it was startup, and getting audit clearance is the critical. So it's a manual process. So once you know what audit you have to adhere to, or what complaints you have to adhere to, it could be PCI, or it could be SOC 2, or it could be ISO, or HIPAA, GDPR, anything. You have a list of security controls that's given by them, and you go through them and make the fixes if there are any gaps, and then be prepared, ready in terms of policies, SOPs, and like all your cloud configurations, everything you fix it, keep it ready, and then prepare 1 week ahead, and then go to the auditor. And I'm going to the auditor, and then there's a big surprise waiting for me. I did not know that, right? And it was a big disaster. And I'm opening a dashboard and showing the cloud configurations, everything. I realized that somebody in my team opened an admin port to a private subnet of a database, and for debugging something, and what happened? Audit failed, and it was a big disaster. Somehow we managed that time, but then it was a very big disaster. So why this has happened, right? What happened? So during the time, there was no mechanism for us to really evaluate and protect something bad happening, right? If I had a framework that would have stopped the engineer who opened the admin port, I would have confidently went and projected myself in front of auditor, but then the confidence level has gone down. From that time onwards, every audit happens. All of us, I'm sure, would have experienced this, that you go through 1 week before and then go. And there's no guarantee that what you prepared is intact when you are presenting to the auditor, right? And that's where policy as a code comes to save our life, especially because with the policy as code, you can write policies, you can convert all your compliance security controls into a code and then put that into your CI/CD pipelines, integrated with your CI/CD pipelines, such that the same engineer who had opened the admin port cannot do it anymore because he is protected. He stopped at the front of before he makes the change. It could be application configuration or it could be your IAC configuration. If you have a right policy tools integrated with your pipeline, you can always ensure that you are guaranteed that no change could have gone that would embarrass you in front of your auditor, right? That's a big shift with policy as code. And the advantages that it brings is obviously it's a continuous compliance. And like earlier, we only took look at the compliance metric just before going to audit. Now, with policy as code, you get opportunity to see the complaints coverage on a daily basis. And it's very early to detect possibility, and then also you can shift left. Obviously, the DevSecOps, you can integrate with your DevSecOps pipeline, and you can shift left. It gives a humongous opportunity for us to protect complete your application cloud infrastructure. And obviously, policy also you can build. In spite of having all this integration, someone could go and change directly in your cloud or in your runtime workload, right? So the best way to do is again put a policy at your runtime. It could be your Kubernetes environment or it could be your cloud environment. Pretty much every cloud and Kubernetes providers have frameworks and tools, and a lot of good tools available. You can integrate and ensure that even if somebody violated your CI/CD pipelines, directly entered into your console to make changes, that can be protected there as well. So it's the biggest advantage.
Awesome. I like the example as well. Harish, do you see similar implementations in insurance? You coming from that space?
Yeah, of course. Say for us, policy as code becomes critical because we store a lot of data, PII data, for example, right? So along with payments, I store, say, in health, we store personal information of the customer, height, weight, medical history, etc. And now it's more pertinent that this data is actually sent across somewhere for analytics, for example, right? And not everything is running in your own cloud. Sometimes you're doing cross-cloud because certain technology is better somewhere else, right? Or maybe we'll answer this the next questions. If you're using an AI tool, you're actually passing some data to do some analysis. So how would you ensure that this data is not going outside? So this is again I'll add to the left shift philosophy, right? Somebody has to ensure that the customer's phone number, for example, is not going as is outside. So you could do two ways. Either you could engineer it, or like I said, policy as code. You'll ensure that before that particular deployment of that service, which is passing the data from A to B, you ensure that the phone number is not visible. It's obfuscated, it is changed, it is masked, etc. So if you run that as a code, you'll ensure that that deployment is not happening very clearly, because that data that is being read and sent outside, you're sure that that number, it could be email, it could be number, whatever, is not going as it is. It's hard to do this, but essentially if you do this, then the cost of maintenance and then the cost of that oops moment that Vasu was talking about is very expensive, right? Yeah. If let's say 1 million records has been sent outside, there's no way to unsend it once you do it. So the cost of recovery becomes extremely large. So it becomes very critical. It's hard to do it. I think it requires both engineering thought and also DevOps thought at the same point in time. How do you engineer it? How do you put it at the right points in time? Do you catch it during your sec testing later, or do you catch it before deployment? Right? Especially if you have a very oiled CI/CD where nobody's touching, taking a look at it, and then you only find it post facto.
Thank you. Yeah, talking about the cost and the implication. I remember CrowdStrike. I think most of us went through, how much we waited in airport and all the implication of that. And I come to you, Anita. You come from that industry. We've spoken about all of this to be done. It's great, but at the end of the day, it's one role, developer doing it, right? How do you really encourage provide him the right tools, balance, priorities, work-life balance, the key thing going on nowadays. How do you handle that?
The question is about the work-life balance, or it is more related to the way we operate? Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's kind of tied in. How do you encourage teams to take up this new load of, hey, DevSecOps is also your ownership, not just coding, right? So.
Yeah, see, for me, what I feel is it is a mindset change. So initially, the way we started in Amadeus is we had a platform unit. So we are split into different business units like hospitality, distribution, airlines, and I basically head the airlines division. So having said that, when we had this platform team helping us with the SRE activities, we just did our job. So we just delivered whatever the business value we had to deliver. We just focused on that. Now with the adoption to the cloud transformation which we are doing, it is a basic shift of mindset. The mindset should be changed from just doing the coding. We are now shifting it, like we just shift all the process by the security by design, shift left aspect. I personally started my career as a C++ developer. So with a decade of experience in Amadeus, what we basically see, at least in some of the design and architecture, which I personally reviewed at the business level, we have, most of them are monolith architecture. So with monolith architecture, infusing security into it and building a robust design was definitely a challenge for us because this is already a design is there, and what we do is we keep evolving on top of the design which is already built. When we look at the architecture and try to infuse security, what we figured out when we have this on-prem model is basically, can we bypass this from the development stage and push it to the network stage, you see? Because this was all on-prem, we had our leverage, we had our own code which was built in. So the security aspect, we started pushing it from one phase to another, and the network was totally robust enough, it was able to catch the defects and move ahead. But with the cloud transformation journey, we lost this leverage. We no longer have this liberty to depend on the network because we are now in different regions with different customers base. So having said that, the mindset of security by design and shifting left should be first adopted. That is what we see. So basically starting from the requirements to the design, to development, test phases, and then operations. So everywhere we had to incorporate security. Now, this requires a great deal of collaboration, not only between the dev and ops, but also the security aspect as well. So let me give the collaboration aspect into two phases. The first phase is within the unit. How do you enforce this culture within the unit? So within the unit, what we started doing is we looked at upskilling the people. So that is the first aspect. And the second one is introduce security champions as part of all the software development lifecycle, starting from design, requirements. So in Amadeus terminologies within our organization, we call them white hats. So they are embedded along with the product definition analysts, the developers and the testers. So they are part of all the phases. Now the third aspect, we also work on the safe agile technology. Now with safe, it is a huge train aspect which we consider, and during this time, we started putting in security managers as epic owners. So they started driving their security epics. Now with the three things like upskilling, embedding our security experts into the development lifecycle, as well as making security managers part of the epic ownership, our organization is now totally autonomous and empowered, and we are collaborating quite clearly between the developer, security, and ops. So that is the first aspect. Now, second, collaboration. So I just explained you that we are a huge organization into different travel business, hospitality and the distribution, the airlines. And we also spoke about CrowdStrike, and there are a lot of commonalities which we see on the security aspect. So it would be a shame for us if every unit starts investigating this issue and there is no knowledge sharing. So definitely, which means that we are not collaborating and working together. And it is like reinventing the same wheel, being in the same organization. So we have a security unit. It is a central security unit. They also work on the security indexes to see how the applications or products are working. At the start of the year, we also submit our backlogs to the central security Unix, saying, okay, this is our vulnerability, these are our scans, these are our reports. So basically, this central security unit ensures that all the business units are well connected and streamlined. So an issue which is happening in one of the business unit is being shared across the other business unit via the central security unit. So putting these two aspects, for me, I think we are totally empowered on adopting this DevSecOps into the organization, I must say.
Awesome. Thanks, Anita. I think from a cultural perspective, we had DevOps engineers, and DevOps part came to developers. Now the new trend is you build it, you run it teams. This is what you're running towards, where the run issues should also be both visible to developers and fixable by developers, right? I think that's the direction we are going. Praveen, do you see a similar trend in fintech, in your company in that perspective?
I think that's a common thing. Whatever we see as a vulnerability nowadays, it goes both ways. As you say, shift left, you have like things which are being identified on developer side, be it the frameworks you are using. Every day, you identify something new. And on the other hand, on the operations side, when it comes to CI/CD setup, when it comes to, let's say, passing through all the automation tests, like what Vasu was saying, all this, unless they come together, it doesn't close. And eventually, all this, if you even skip one point across the pipeline, you'll see something which is not too heartening to see. So I think that's how it is nowadays.
Awesome. Thank you. So we finished three segments. We spoke about onboarding, the tools, the way you should bring them together, where you focus on. We also spoke about operationalizing. How do you prioritize? How do you build teams around it? We also spoke about optimizing. We spoke about KPIs, SLAs, policy as code. We wanted to spend some time on where do we see this going, as we move along, specifically with, the new things around AI, agentic AI, all of this coming. Is this relevant to our domain? How do we see this happening? So on that, Harish, I wanted to ask you, essentially that theme, how do you see AI, evolving around cybersecurity, DevSecOps, do you see something we can take home?
Yeah, I think I'll answer this in maybe 2-3 parts, and maybe the sub parts out of it. It's a very complicated question. So the question looks very simple, right? So let's look at DevOps on one side and security at the other side. So number one is how does it affect the DevOps industry itself? That's the first question to answer. Second is now that there is more, now engineering, if I look at evolution, we had on-prem DevOps would do a different job. We had then cloud DevOps would evolve into doing something else. Now with AI, they have to do something else, right? Because engineering is also changing essentially. So in the world of AI right now, engineers use AI technology, maybe they don't build it. There's another angle where engineers themselves also build it, host it in-house, etc., right? So if you look at the first part of the question, to say how is the entire DevOps sector changing because of this. So it's not only the engineering side, when engineering I mean the product engineering side of it. The DevOps engineers also have access to the same kind of tools. For example, the same GitHub Copilot, for instance, today can do a lot of automation for the automators. If you consider DevOps engineers to be automators, it can help them today to build those scripts. It can help them today to sort of understand those kind of architectures that are needed by the engineering teams, right? So for example, today, whatever it takes to code up a Terraform, Git Copilot can do it quickly for you, right? You can find your own vulnerabilities in the system, which probably would not have been possible some time ago, right? That's the first part, how they can leverage that particular technology, right? Number two is every vendor, and I'm quite sure you're also doing it, has an AI module right now, because they cannot survive unless they adopt this new technology, right? It could be, for example, on threat detection. So the people who are running threat detection software today have an AI angle where, like the automated capture. Right now, it's very simple for somebody to write that vulnerability and run that vulnerability against systems. So every tool developer today is also creating an AI module within their own systems. Yeah. For example, today an engineer has to look at logs across systems. Maybe looks at a tool that aggregates logs, right? And then searches for something. Maybe, but now with the AI systems in place, there are technologies where that automatically is done by that particular tool. And then you don't have to scan through lines and lines of logs. It comes naturally to the DevOps engineer to say, this system is behaving inappropriately, right? The CPU on this system is essentially behaving erratically as compared to the last so many days, right? Because that particular module slash plugin slash whatever didn't exist, maybe 2 years before. Today that is able to do this. So the DevOps engineer, first of all, has to be well-read, knowledgeable, has to catch up with what is happening around, understand what are these AI changes that are happening in the tool chain of what they use, right? And then they should be able to leverage it, right? Every cloud company today in the world is actually adding those modules within there. That's the first part of the problem. The second is, if you imagine key rotation, which is a very simple philosophy that every DevOps guy follows, it becomes harder to do it right now with people calling AI APIs. For example, in the older systems, my system called API 1. I had a post method, I had some parameters, send it to some public API, it gives me a result. But now if you're calling an LLM, for instance, you're passing the entire context to that particular LLM because you're trying to do interpretation, you're trying to, so people are passing email context, the entire email, to that LLM and saying, give me the sentiment of this customer. They're not passing, key 1, key 2, key 3, key 4. They are passing like the entire token context, right? So now the DevOps engineer has to figure out, hey, how does my system get affected? Because this guy is not passing key value pairs. He or she is passing entire context that is coming in. Agentic systems today wake up, do something, they call systems outside. Like I was talking about in the previous session, the data that is getting passed is no more structured key value data that the programmer has control upon. Because he or she is essentially grabbing data from somewhere, could be an event, could be an email, could be a voice transcription that is being sent to sentiment analysis, right? So when you do that, your normal key rotation, your normal stuff will not work. You have to be extra diligent with how you ensure these systems are connected to systems, essentially outside. So that's the second part of it. The third part of it, which is not so very prevalent today and which will become more prevalent. I was talking to people in the forum and they said, hey, some of us are already doing it. People will find a certain cost balance between calling public LLMs versus training, deploying their own LLM for two reasons. Number one, the public LLMs don't do what they want to do. Like in industry, like in insurance where we do, there's no LLM today that understands a medical term. Yeah, maybe Medi assist, they can chime in here. Today, if I send an ICD code, no LLM understands it because it is very specific to that particular domain. So I will end up training either a small model or a variant of a smaller version of the large model on those particular terms. Now it's the responsibility within the DevOps, team, in my company, to help me build that pipeline, to help me build that training module securely, right? To help me do that inference appropriately. We will have to always work, and with this new philosophy, it's not proven that I know X containers will cost Y. Because this is totally new. I don't know how many GPUs I will need. I don't know what is the cost if I run it in-house. I don't know how much, will I incur if I run it, outside. Is it possible for me to start up and tear down wherever I need it, right? I don't know today. Meaning the engineering teams today are learning this particular piece. It's not well established. So there is a frontier where the DevOps teams today are working, where the teams, the functional teams, have added new requirements. he threw out to the knowledge base that does not exist, right? So what it takes for me to train, does it take, I don't know, 25 lakhs, 5 crores? People don't have a clue how long it takes, to be able to do that. The engineering team may come back and say, it's not trained enough, my accuracy is only 75%, I did 90%. The last 20% may probably take 2 times the cost, and the pipelines may look entirely, very different. Of course, there are stages where, there are changes in Kubernetes, there are changes across, there's this NVIDIA, GPU management software, etc. But all these are evolving. There are no standard patterns to look for. So that is the key skilling and evolution part that the teams today have to learn, both on the engineering side and also within the DevOps community, to ensure that if the organization needs it, the organization is ready for it, right? Today, organizations are not ready for it. If I today ask somebody to say, hey, tell me, I want to train a small SLM, I want to be able to do inference on top of it, and I need you to do it in less than, say, 2 crores. The first answer is, I have to go figure out and come back, right? They really don't know if it is possible, not possible, 3 months project, 6 months project, etc., right? So that's the third frontier, which probably is the key for today's engineers to learn, develop, and establish that as a best practice, and maybe share across, right? It helps the industry overall to say, hey, somebody has figured it out, here's a paper on top of it, I published it on my website, please go take a look at it. And if you do something, come back and contribute. I think that's the third key piece of how this particular piece will evolve.
Sure. Thanks, Harish. I also see, there are a lot of, there's one at a deep level you want to do specifically for your domain. A lot of open source models coming, Hugging Face and all of them. They're throwing multiple domains, etc. A lot of them are consuming, and that itself is imposing security risks. Should I use that model, not use that model? So there is a MLOps kind of a concept that need to come in as well, as we evolve. I want to now move to the last question to Pushparaj on how do you see organizations, evolving, with all of this happening, the feedback loop, understanding, hey, this is better, like we did CI 2 decades back, right? Because that has to be there even for this larger DevSecOps that are running. So what's your view on that, and how are you doing it?
Thanks, Prasanna. There is an interesting and very, every organization has the same kind of problem, right? When you get the full feedback loop, first the security has to be embedded in every phase of your product life cycle, right? It is a 4-step process. First thing is that you need to generate or collect the data using your automation tools or your various kind of reports you're generating. First, you need to collect the data. Second is you are distributing the data. How are you going to distribute the data so that any stakeholder should be able to see the real time, the correct information anytime, right? Second thing. Third one is action. Who is going to act on it? It could be the developers or security engineers or your managers. They should be able to quickly act, and then within the SLA they should be able to fix the issue. And the fourth one is about feedback loop in terms of measuring and improving it. The KPIs which we discussed earlier, all the things can be measured. How are we doing in our organization is that our entire SAST and DAST, our third-party vulnerabilities, everything has been automated now, and this information will be published as a report and available as a dashboard to the team. And we have our SIEM as well as our real-time checks are being implemented. So in addition to the normal run, this information also has been verified so that you will be getting a real time feedback to the loop. Third thing is that most of the things we are trying to do now is that we are trying to implement as a policies. Either it's a code, right? Security as a code or your complaints as a policy, and how best we'll be able to trigger that, integrate it with the Git actions and your Jenkins pipeline so that it can be automated into that. And as one of the panelists mentioned, shift left is very, very important cultural shift we need. We can't put an independent team who can work alone, own this DevSecOps is not going to happen. So we continuously educate the developers. We identify a security champion within the team who will be regularly taking care of this load across the loops what we have, right? I think these are the things, and finally, as I said, the metrics which you measure, which will feed loop into the entire ecosystem so that we continuously evolve, and then you will be able to achieve the closed feedback loop.
Thank you, Pushparaj. Naresh, I will kind of come back to you on the same question. We have probably 60 seconds for you. given Infosys is continuously improving, adding more people but making them more productive, and you being owner of productivity and DevSecOps, right? So how do you measure and manage this specific area?
So we have a pretty elaborate measurement system in the company. I'll not get into the nitty-gritties of that. But fundamentally, adding on to what Pushparaj said, for any feedback loop to work, trust is essential. And what drives trust is, so trust in people comes from your ability to build trust in your processes and trust in your data. And therefore, automating with that view that everybody is looking at the same version of the truth is very critical, right? The second thing is culturally, right? You will have to become more and more data driven. Opinions have their own place, but eventually decisions should be made based on data. And that sort of becomes the foundational layer for any of these things to work, right? So systems are then built on top of that data, systems are built on top of the processes, and which then drives tremendous amount of trust amongst people. So for any effective DevSecOps ecosystem to function, in my view, this becomes sort of the foundational element. And your measurement and performance evaluation system can then be based on this. So we have persona-based metrics and measurements that we look at across the value chain. And these are actually largely system generated. Obviously, managers will have a view in terms of when they do evaluations to add on, but that's an 80-20. 80% should come from the system, there is 20% which comes from the human aspect of it, right? The softer things, communication and stuff like that. So I think that's how we have sort of looked at the whole mechanism. And I think the critical point I would re-emphasize again is the trust in terms of the process and the data. That builds a trust in people.
Awesome. Thanks, Naresh. So that's about it, folks. We kind of covered onboarding, operationalizing, optimizing, and a little bit of future and how you can manage with AI and also continuously innovating, improving. Time is up. If you have any questions, the panel is around, so you can feel free to catch us and ask. Thank you very much. It was awesome to speak to you. Thank you.